Welcome to another episode of the Brew Deck Podcast. I'm your host, Toby Tucker. Today we're talking all things fruit. And I saw a t-shirt that said fruit at the finish recently with a tagline. I said, just fruit it. Like the Nike slogan, just do it, but just fruit it instead. It was for a triathlon, but the slogan aligns pretty well with the craft brewing industry trends that we're seeing right now. It's a lot of breweries just fruiting it, just going in with all things fruit in their beer. And so really excited to talk to my guest today, a good buddy, Chris Hodge from Oregon Fruit Products. How you doing, buddy?
Toby, good to be with you, man. Thanks for the opportunity to get in front of the crowd of beer lovers and fruit lovers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we kind of both know about this explosion of the use of fruit, particularly for brewing. Very excited to have you on as a certified Cicerone and director of sales at Oregon Fruit Products, who's a very valued partner at a Country Malt Group. So let's start with some low-hanging fruit, kind of peel back the banana, so to speak.
Oh, boy.
Did you always know that fruit was your jam?
Oh, my God.
I just had to do it.
I always knew that beer was my jam, Toby. I started in the beer business in 1984 and started a small distributorship back before craft brewing was even a thing. I think they actually referred to it as microbreweries back then. Spent 10 years building an arsenal of amazing beers from around the world and hooked up with some original craft brewers back in the mid 80s, late 90s, little tiny breweries like Widmer and Deschutes and Full Sail and Rogue and some noted big pioneers of the industry back then. And then spent about 24 years after we sold our distributorship to one of the largest distributors in the US. And I managed all the craft and import brands for about 24 years for Columbia Distributing. So beer is in my blood. When you ask the question about fruit, I spent many years traveling to Europe and hanging out with a bunch of crazy Belgians who helped introduce the idea of fruit in beer and became a Belgian fruit beer lover. And sitting here today with you, I couldn't imagine back in the 80s and 90s that fruit beer would be on the leading edge of innovation for the craft industry.
That's pretty interesting that, obviously the history that you had in the beer brewing industry, if you will. Evolution of Oregon Fruit Products. So how did you guys go from canned fruit for pie filling to aseptic fruit puree for the craft brewing industry?
It was a really strange and almost sort of natural evolution. Oregon Fruit has been around for 85 years. This is our 85th anniversary. And for about the first, 50 years or so, it was, owned by a family out of Salem, Oregon. And, back in the day, people loved canned fruit, canned everything. In fact, I think I grew up eating half of my vegetables out of cans. But what happened was, as people's taste changed, so did the need for looking for something different than canned fruit to reach the audience. Back in about late 80s, Oregon Fruit, one of their new up and coming superstars at the time, decided that there was a need and a desire to have these fruits turned into a pureed form. Didn't know what the hell they were going to do with it, quite frankly. It was funny because if I look back at the histories of what happened with Oregon Fruit, they had this Heinz ketchup aseptic puree processor. And for the first 5 to 6 years they had it, they kind of just made purees occasionally just for the hell of it. And they found that there was some food manufacturers that liked it for industrial use. And then there was a brewery out of Louisiana, Abita Brewing, and they were developing a beer called Purple Haze. They were one of the first big-time users of fruit. And then there was a little brewery in Eugene, Oregon called Steelhead Brewing. And a good friend of yours and I, who is an amazing brewer on her own accord, Terry Ferendorf, decided that raspberry would be a great addition to one of her beers she was making at Steelhead. So that was sort of the jump-off point for realizing that the fermentation world really was a great home for these pureed fruits. And it's been a rocket ship since, the late 90s. And I joined in 2016 and have seen our business literally quadruple within just 4 years. So the need is there. And now we're seeing that craft in itself is screaming for innovation. And thankfully, the Oregon Fruit purees are a really easy and fun way to add amazing complexity to a huge variety of different beer styles.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very popular. Very popular. And you mentioned Terry Ferendorf. We actually had Terry on a podcast here recently talking about the Malt Innovation Center. So she's been around, and it's an interesting story that you mentioned that she was playing around with some fruit back in the days.
Yeah.
Tell me about, and I think the listeners would like to hear too, the general fundamental differences in flavor or aroma in canned fruit versus aseptic? And can you add in any additional information on the two or give anybody some information that might help them in the brew house?
Absolutely. I think the fundamental difference is that, puree fruit is just that. It's pure fruit, no sugars added, no anything added, quite frankly. And what we found is that by the processing that it goes through, the pasteurization process, becoming an aseptic commercially sterile product, it locks in and captures all the aromas, color, flavor components that you would expect out of biting into a fresh mango, for example, or cutting open a pineapple and smelling the tropical aromas. Whereas some of the other methods of fruit processing, whether it's canning, drying, freezing, you name it, there's not a lot of them that can capture the true essence of the purity of the fruit. One of the things we do too is, the first decade of aseptic processing, we would try to source as local as possible. And as we know, farmers have had a really challenging time these last 20 or 30 years. And we were able to source 90% of our fruit within a 100-mile radius of our facility in Salem, Oregon, the Willamette Valley being a very fertile growing area. Those days have changed. We still try to source where possible, locally, but we've now broadened our reach to capture all the great fruits from some of the tropical growing regions. And even with those types of fruits, we're still able to maintain a really intense fruit experience, which I think gives our aseptic purees sort of a little bit of a head start when it comes to using them for a brew that you want to really exemplify the nuances of the fruit.
Yeah, and speaking of brew, and I am nowhere close to being entitled a brewer by any means. Mm-hmm. I certainly like drinking beer and I've homebrewed a little bit, but I sense in speaking to some folks at the brewery in certain breweries that there's some fear of brewing with fruit in general. How do you kind of get people over that hump there and kind of talk them off the ledge and get them to try fruit in their beers?
Well, first of all, it's legitimate. I don't know if fear is the right word or just the fact that the unknown of what works best.
Yep.
And here's the deal. There are multitudes of ways to, infuse a beer with fruit properly. And there's no perfect way. There's no right way. There are a couple wrong ways, and we won't focus on those. But the ease of use is really amazing. Basically, we recommend that, they dose during primary fermentation. You can do it during and after the secondary, but there's a lot of folks now who I think for all the right reasons do get a little leery, if they dose the beer after cold crash, just because there is a possibility of secondary fermentation. But even those, if, maintained properly, filtered properly, can be sold with confidence. The real starting process is do innovation, small benchtop trials. If you've got a pilot system, great. If you don't, we send free samples all over the world of our purees, and brewers themselves will tinker, at their desktop, at their bar top, in their brewery with, these samples to really identify when they want to add the fruit, the level of intensity of fruit they expect out of the beer. And then obviously we're always available to talk, and I'd love to talk about fruit and beer, to give people ideas on how they can get the most out of their fruit investment. I mean, there's no secret that cost of goods is really a critical component of what brewers are concerned about, whether it's your malt, your hops, yeast. Fruit now is a big part of that, cost of good component. So we want to make sure that if people are going to do a fruited beer, that they get the most out of their fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. And outside of myself, as far as Country Malt Group, we've got a large portion of our sales team are brewers by trade. So certainly available to share some knowledge as well, specifically on Oregon fruit and brewing with it. So you mentioned Terry over at Steelhead and Abita. Any other breweries that you remember that, were kind of the first to start buying fruit puree from you guys?
There's so many. I really would prefer not to mention names. I will tell you that our customer base numbers in the thousands. We're currently doing business in about, 13 countries outside of the U.S. as well. And the good news about the fruit brewing world is that it touches every type of brewer out there, the smallest one-barrel system brewer all the way up to some of the largest, corporate brewers of the world. Everybody's playing with fruit now. I do know back in the earlier days, back in the 90s, fruit it really wasn't a thing in the craft world. I mean, hops reigned supreme. I mean, how many years, I'll count about 20 years, where IPAs were all people could think about, talk about, and drink. It wasn't until around 2010 when we started to see that saturation was running rampant. brewers were looking for something different. And that's when Oregon Fruit really realized that, oh, wow, if this thing takes hold, every brewer in the world is going to at some point want to play with fruit. And again, we have barrel aging programs, the milkshakes, the slushies, the hazies, the sours, the kettle sours, the Berliner Weiss, you name it. Every beer style out there, when done properly, can really shine with a little dosing of fruit.
So I'm getting thirsty. Jeez. So you guys are lucky to be kind of located where you are up in the Pacific Northwest, but you guys do a lot of fruit puree. Tell me about the process of procuring whole fruit from all over the place, not specifically out of the Pacific Northwest, but you got to look for a lot of different fruit. Tell me about that process and what goes into it.
So it was about 8 years ago when the idea of releasing seasonals was spawned. Basically, it came from all of our years of experience. Ours being our CEO also spent over 20 years in the beer business. So we believe that, having a seasonal program was critical to, keeping relevant. At that point, we, released, a couple fun fruits that we thought, oh, this will be cool to play around with. Well, every seasonal, with the exception of 2, I think we've released 24 seasonals just in the last 6 years, has become a year-round product. And what we realized is that sourcing was a challenge. And so the majority of sourcing from outside of the U.S., where, fruit has to travel thousands and thousands of miles, is IQF fruit, whereby during harvest, they will process the fruit into an instant quick freeze setup where it's either chunks or in a slurried format. Then that's shipped to us, and then we use our aseptic process to turn it into a commercially sterile product that brewers can use. And as you all know, and your teams know, I think that's one of the best selling points. It's ready to use when it shows up. It can be shipped ambient, stored ambient, and it really captures the essence of the fruit, from where it was grown. So it's really just a matter of making logistic decisions on committing to sourcing, and those sourcing agreements, you have to basically sign up for, okay, we're going to buy, X amount of thousands or millions of pounds of fruit. And you got to commit to making sure that we have access to that fruit. And that's the real challenge. Is the growth of this category has been explosive, as you and your teams know. And our contracts on a world scale have quadrupled just in the last 3 years because of the demand for the tropicals and citrus and all the fruits that you can't grow in the Pacific Northwest.
I can't imagine whoever in your company's responsible for going out and finding all this stuff. Seems like a huge task. Well, you mentioned kind of seasonals, and then I know you guys have new releases every year at least. We had lemon come to the market from you guys this year, and then key lime last year. Tell us about the selection process for choosing new releases and why those selections are made.
2 things. We have a very strong food service channel of business that's sort of the third leg of the stool at Oregon Fruit. And we look at food trends, we look at international flavor trends, and then most importantly, we listen to our customers. We have been asking customers for the last 5 years, what do you guys want? What do you all need? What do you want to play with? We've hit a couple duds. There were a couple wacky fruits that, we heard about, we tasted, we thought, oh, this will be interesting and unique. And it really depends upon, those 3 components: food trends, flavor trends, and then most importantly, combining those 2 channels of information with what brewers are looking for. And I got to tell you, the Craft Brewers Conference about 3 years ago, there was 2 or 3 fruits that were mentioned that now have become mainstays for them. What we do is we source enough fruit for 1 or 2 big production runs. We, sort of temper the demand with, what we think we can source. And then if the demand stays high, we'll continue to have it as a year-round item. In fact, the ones you mentioned, the Meyer lemon is year-round, mango, pineapple, pink guava, those were all seasonals that have now become year-round. Blood orange was a seasonal. So what you're seeing is our portfolio will grow to a point where we figure we can still manage it properly, keep the sourcing fresh, and also, cater to the needs of the marketplace. And so that's why you'll see citrus this year being a big focus for us. In addition, we'll do some wacky stuff. We're bench topping some kiwi, some dragon fruit. So basically, I would encourage all the listeners and all of your customers and your teams to just continue to throw ideas our way. And just keep in mind, nothing is too weird.
It's good to hear. So some of those duds, when you taste them, they taste fantastic. But is it just the combination or the end product in a beer that just doesn't do it justice? What happens there?
Well, you kind of nailed it. It's a little of both. During our benchtop trials, we'll do all the sensory that you need, for pH, Brix levels, aroma, color, everything you would do for a typical beer sensory. However, when you take that fruit and once it's been processed and, mix it with, the pH of the hops and the alpha and beta acids and the fermentation process and some of the esters that come off from different types of yeast strains, not to mention the enzymatic sort of activity that goes along with some of these fruits, you don't know what you'll get. One example was a soursop, which we did, which I thought smelled like, gym socks mixed with, blue cheese. It was weird, but I got to tell you, man, for whatever reason, we mixed it with a little tangerine to take that bite off. And at first, people were like, what the hell is this? The next thing you know, a year after it was gone, people are like, where's that soursop that you guys had that one time? It's like, wow.
Huh.
There's some pretty good ways to test a beer or a fruit to see if it's going to work well, but there's no perfect method. There are some that have just surprised the hell out of me. The key line that we made for a seasonal, I thought was incredibly intense, almost over the top, too tart to even, work. It's been turned into some of the most amazing beers I've tasted. There's brewers that are using it in tequila barrel-aged beers. They're using it in gozes. You're taking sour with, even more souring and turning into just a luxurious margarita type beer. So I think it really tests the boundaries of the artisan within each brewer that we know love to push the boundaries of strange flavor profiles.
That's what I love about this industry. These brewers will try anything. They really will.
Yeah. And they're creative geniuses sometimes, Toby. I got to tell you, man, I've talked to some brewers who will take a combination of our fruits, mix it together in some sort of concoction you would never, think of trying. We had a brewer in Canada that did this massive release of a grapefruit pomegranate. And, to me, it sounds like, really contradictory flavor profiles. Freaking amazing. Blew people's minds.
Just got to try it. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned like taste combinations. I have a good buddy of mine that one of his favorite combination is red wine and Doritos. It's the weirdest thing. Like, what? I tried it and I wasn't a big fan of it, but yeah, he loves it. Danny, if you're listening, I'm sharing your secret. I'm sorry. No. So being in the fruit industry, do you have fruit smoothies for every meal? With the access to such fantastic fruits? Or are you like a meat and potato guy and just tired of anything fruit?
Well, okay. So, I'm a dude and I got to tell you, I love fruit, but I have a banana and that's my fruit of the day. So I got to tell you, honestly, I just don't eat a lot of fruit. I mean, I think fruit's amazing. My kids eat fruit like 3 times a day. I thought fruit beers back in the mid 90s were like a passing fad. I've drank more fruit beer in the last 5 years than I've had my entire life. And I've drank a lot of beer. You know what? If you have a really well-made fruit beer, it becomes a whole different drinking experience.
No, you're right. I completely agree. Yeah. All right. Well, a guy that only likes bananas and is in the fruit business. Interesting. So no, going back. What is your favorite food? I know you like fruits. I'm just giving you a hard time. So what is your favorite food? Let's just say it's your last meal that you could have before you jump into a coffin. What meal would that be?
I really like a really well seared ribeye that's been aged properly and a giant lobster tail right next to it that's been, just dripping with butter. Maybe throw in some thinly sliced potatoes on the side. And then, a nice glass of red wine.
Man, thirsty and hungry. Wow. This is taking a hard left. That's for sure. All right. Okay. What's your favorite beer? Seltzer or, we talked a little bit about your fruit, but anything you're particularly drawn to these days?
I really think it's important to think about that last part of that sentence, these days. So with a 34-year history in the beer business, I've gone through many, different eras of beer loving. I never forget traveling to Belgium. I think the first time was in 1988. And for almost 7 or 8 years, all I could think about when I thought about beer was Belgian beers. And I ran the gamut of, not only traveling to Belgium multiple times, but, falling in love with all the beer styles. Then I went through my German phase. I think there was a time during the mid 90s where IPA to me was everything a beer was meant to be. and I, drank my way across the world of IPAs a couple different times. And I still love an IPA. In fact, if I were to choose one beer that I would just, drink on a daily basis, it would be an IPA. I have really, in the last 2 years, done a huge amount of research on Pilsners. I love a good Pils. I don't really care what style of Pils. I just love a really well-made Pils. And then the fruit beers, to me, I love a fruited sour. I mean, if I were to pick one fruit style of beers, it would certainly be something that was made either kettle soured or, a true wild ferment sour, because I think to me that really brings out the character not only of a fruited or sour beer, but it really is the best marriage of fruit with a fermented beverage. I mean, personally, that's where I lean for sure.
All right. What about the strangest or wildly weird beer that you've ever encountered?
Well, this whole category of slushies and milkshakes.
Yeah, you're right.
I have no clue how or why. All I know is I'm really glad that people have fallen in love with these wacky concoctions.
Oh, me too. Hey, I got to retract that question because, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I guess I was thinking about myself here because one time when I first started, I visited this brewery, and I will not name this brewery, but he made a beer using the fungus of a deceased person's toenail. I guess utilized it and then cultured a yeast out of it and made a beer. It was, I don't even have words for it. When he mentioned it to me, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But, I tried it and I wouldn't have known one way or the other, but just strange. But I applaud the brewers out there for being creative. That's for sure.
Well, and the good news is there's nothing that's too weird. If you look back in the 80s and 90s, the McMinimums group in Oregon, all of their beer brewers were allowed to do anything they wanted to do. I mean, remember those eras when, people would literally,
oh, yeah.
I don't care if it was Pop-Tarts or, Snickers bars or whatever. And the fun part was there was nothing that was ever too weird. In fact, sometimes the weirder, the better. And most of those breweries, a lot of them at that time were using open fermenters. So not only did you have the wackiness of the ingredients, but you had the weird wild yeast strains that would, impart those unique flavors. So I'm a true believer that there is nothing that's wrong with innovation, but I think to stay commercially relevant and to have a brand that's going to continue to grow, you have to push those envelopes to make sure that you are unearthing every potential flavor profile that might someday be a superstar hit. You just never know.
Yep, that's true. Well, for the listeners out there, Oregon Fruit Products just has a massive array of just awesome selection of fruit purees. The 42-pound aseptic packages, I think we pretty much stock every DC we have. Just a fantastic lineup. And we're very appreciative of you, Chris, and your partnership along with Country Malt Group to kind of help spread these out and make them very easily accessible to our customer base here in North America. So definitely appreciate you coming on. And what's interesting is I think in the Whirlpool episode next, we'll be talking to a gentleman who I guess has a culinary background and now brews. And we'll be talking about a little bit of fruit and non-traditional ingredients. So for those listeners, stick around. You definitely want to hear that. So Chris Hodge, thanks so much for joining us again today. And I really look forward to seeing you again when all this COVID stuff goes away. But definitely a wealth of knowledge with Chris. If you got any questions about Oregon Fruit Products, reach out to your Country Malt Group territory manager. And then if it's something we can't answer, we will certainly get in touch with Chris. Chris, any final words for our listeners here?
I just want to say to the Country Malt team that I couldn't be happier to have such a great working relationship with some super talented beer and food lovers across North America. One of the best relationships we built was with your teams. And, even though a big chunk of our business is direct with brewers, our reach and the depth and breadth of what we can do together is super exciting. So I look forward to hearing from you guys and all the listeners out there. Toby, thank you so much for giving me the time to bend your ear a little bit, and hope everyone has a great holiday season.
All right, Chris. Hey, I appreciate you.
I knew you couldn't do it.
I had to finish on it. All right. All jokes aside, man. Thanks so much. Hey, make it a great weekend. And Chris, we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Toby.
Thanks, buddy.
Bye.
excited about today's guest that's going to put on the old swim trunks and dive into the whirlpool with me today. I absolutely love to cook and play around with ingredients in the kitchen. And it's interesting that I heard we had the potential of having this individual on. I read an article late last year, and I believe it was in Food and Wine magazine, highlighting the Asheville brewing scene and how they're just constantly pushing the boundaries of beer and food for that matter. So super excited when I learned that Gary Cernak of Bramari Brewing was joining us. He's out of Asheville, North Carolina, and super thrilled to have him on with me today. For those that don't know, Gary is known for not only his culinary approach to brewing and kind of the vast array of ingredients that he uses pretty consistently there at the brewery, but also a chef by trade. So you'll see what we mean when we kind of get into the meat of the discussion. So Gary, hey, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a super busy guy and appreciate you carving out the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Chris Lovett, who's our sales rep out there in North Carolina, was like, we cannot have anybody but Gary joining you. So we're excited. We're excited. So we just got off a conversation with Chris Hodge from Oregon Fruit Products, which, hey, I'm not sure if you guys use some of their stuff. It's fantastic stuff. But let's talk about fruit. Do you prefer to showcase a single fruit in your recipe development? Or are you more of a kind of a whole bunch of fruits, just throw some stuff in kind of guy and see what turns out?
Definitely a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. I really like doing different combinations of fruits. It speaks to me, just kind of how things play with each other. Certain things support things in certain ways that you can't achieve with just a singular addition of one kind of fruit. I like other types of ingredients to see how they play with fruit, nuts, spices, herbs, whatever it may be. So yeah, man. So a little bit of both for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned singularity versus kind of the sum of the parts greater than the sum of the parts. So I love smoking meat and been playing with different kinds of wood as flavor in my meats. And cherry, for instance, is a fantastic wood to use to give that red kind of rosé color, but it's not something that I would use 100% on meat. It's, it works great with a combination of pecan or hickory, but it's interesting you mentioned that's very similar in the fruit world.
I love smoking meat too, man. I'm looking at my smoker right now and it's calling me.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've got a piece of brisket that I've been brining. I'm going to throw it on this weekend to try to make some pastrami for the first time. And
cool.
Yeah, giant slab of bacon I'm going to try out too. So
nice. I did a brisket last weekend and smoked a tenderloin with some peach wood. I did barrel staves for the brisket, which was fun.
Gosh, my kind of guy. Well, it's interesting. We're talking about food. We're kind of getting off topic here, but there's me, my wife, an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we're in a bubble down here like most people are, and didn't see the family over the holidays, but I'm still smoking a 16-pound brisket and eating leftovers for like 4 months. I don't care. It's a good time.
Yeah, both my wife and my daughter are vegetarians. So and I can't invite people over to help me eat all this food. So
the good thing about barbecue is it lasts forever. You can pull it out of the freezer if you pack it right, and it still tastes fantastic.
Yeah, for sure.
What's your typical, and again, I know it completely depends on the fruit, but what's your typical dosage range for fruited beers? Is there like a staple kind of generic amount, or is it just let's throw some in there and see how it turns out?
I guess as like a general rule of thumb, where I start is around 50 pounds per barrel of fruit. And that's a lot of fruit. And
yeah, it is.
Obviously you wouldn't do that with something like key lime or like a citrus, that's really pungent, or stuff that's really pungent. But, for berries, that's a good starting point for me. But pretty much around that range is where we sit. Once again, it really depends on what we're trying to do. If we're doing like a barrel-aged sour beer and we want to really focus on the nuance of that barrel character and make it funk forward, we're not going to drown all that out with a ton of fruit. We'll just kind of use the fruit as a complementary flavor to those things, if we even fruit it, So I guess it really just depends on what we're doing, what style of beer we're doing, and what the end result that we're looking for is.
Now, are y'all rolling with a pilot system out there that you can just do some trials, or is it like, hey, let's throw a ton of stuff in there and see what comes out?
So we have a 1-barrel. My old homebrew system, I guess, is the 1-barrel electric stout system. And we brewed on it up until about last year. And then I'm just like, man, it takes too much time just to make a barrel or two of beer. So we do have a pilot program where we'll just take a little bit of wort. We have a 15-barrel ABS system, and we'll just transfer a little bit of wort into, I've got 3 1-barrel single-walled conicals, 2 2-barrel single-walled conicals, and a 2-barrel jacketed conical that will just kind of shoot wort off into and give it different treatments, give it different yeasts, give it different kinds of hops. So we still have the means to experiment on a smaller level, but we're not necessarily brewing on a pilot system. We use the electric HLT as a caustic reservoir at this point. So
now, are you adding all your fruit into bright tanks, or what point in the brewing process, or does it change depending on the beer that you're brewing? Not just in the kettle, but after fermentation?
Sure. Most of our fruit we'll add maybe like day 3 into fermentation and then let the yeast chew on it there and ferment it out. We have been experimenting with not fermenting the fruit and kind of putting it in the bright, so we mostly make our beer package stable. So once it goes into cans, it can sit at room temperature without exploding. So we'll ferment the fruit out and drop it out. We do unitanks for everything. So, everything start to finish in the conical. More often than not, we're fermenting the fruit out, adding all the fruit during fermentation. And so
I gotcha.
But we definitely have done some unfermented fruit beers that are, all the rage these days. But I can't bring myself to send them out the door. So,
Really?
Not in the can, like it's just a matter of time. It's not like an if scenario, it's a when scenario.
It's when,
explode in the back of someone's car,
Yeah, actually. Yeah. Talk about color saturation specifically with fruit and kind of depth of that color. Do you find that if someone orders a beer, let's say with blueberry puree in it, for example, does the beer need to be straight up dark blue or blue tinted for your consumers to say, this is fantastic? I guess what I'm saying is, do you think they associate a particular fruit with a color in the end product?
I think so, man. And I love colorful beer. It almost has that effect when a sizzling tray of fajitas goes past you at the Mexican restaurant and you're like, ooh, what's that? I want that. So I feel like if you got a bright purple beer or a blue beer or a pink beer, it's going to have that fajita effect. And, who doesn't like looking at a pretty liquid, right?
No, that's a good point. I like the fajita mantra there. I'm down here in Texas, so we get a lot of them. You're right. There's nothing better than that sizzling hot plate of fajitas and the smell of it. That's
right. You go out to get some Mexican food and you're hungry and that thing walks past you and you're ready.
Yeah. The bad thing is they serve way too many chips and salsa down here. And queso. I mean, a lot of people don't know what queso is, which is sad. But by the time you end up getting your food, you're so full anyways.
I think of that as like a plus thing. Like I'm getting my money's worth because then I could take it home. I got a couple meals afterwards,
There you go. Yeah. So trial and error kind of learning curve using fruit puree, specifically talking to the listeners that don't have a whole lot of experience in using it and kind of brewing with fruit. Do you have any suggestions as far as do's, don'ts, successes, failures, any stories?
I've learned so much along the way just messing with different fruits. And, we use a lot of fresh fruit and local fruit and organic fruit when it's in season as well. I guess with that, processing it is the big thing. I guess just really playing around with it. You got to do something before you can know how it acts and reacts and whatnot. So I don't know anything specific. I guess I've learned so much that I forgot what I've learned.
I'm sure that anything that comes out of the end result of messing around is going to be palatable at very least, right? So
sure,
that's all you can do is try.
A big thing for us when making clean beer, because we have a mixed facility where we're doing mixed culture beer alongside clean beer. So sanitation is big for us. So we're pretty rigid about, say we're using aseptic bags, like they sit in parasitic and then we spray them with isopropyl. We've got a blow by going on in the tank. So we're just pretty careful. We kind of are a little more cavalier when we're doing mixed culture stuff because you're competing with the established culture in there. And I'm not too worried about what else happens, but
sure.
Well, I guess that's the sanitation protocol.
Yeah, I would imagine for sure. I mean, sanitation is as big as any brewery, but if you're doing kind of a mixed bag of things up there, it's even more so important. What's your favorite fruited beer that you've had?
That I've had or that I've made or both, I guess.
How about both? I'm just curious, kind of what's been one of those ones where it just light bulbs go off in your head or, you start dancing a jig after taking a sip of it?
Dre Fontaine Creek is pretty special, or the Frambois. That one definitely makes me dance a little bit of a jig. I don't remember what brewery it was. Somebody dropped off a can. It was a mix of marshmallow and vanilla and a couple different fruits. Obviously, I'm not painting enough of a picture that's specific. I might have had a few in maybe when I had it, but I just remember taking a sip of it and being like, man, that's good. I wish I had more details for you. But as far as fruited beers that we've made, we did a pretty interesting one called Drifting into Science that had a lot of fruit. It was a combination of soursop, pink guava, and key lime. And it was a blonde base that was soured for about 19 months in gin barrels. And when it hit the palate, it was something that I'd never really experienced before. So I didn't even know what to make of it. I was like, oh, I don't know that I like this. And then, once I got used to it and drank it, it was exceptional. Different, unique. I like when my palate is challenged and not in a bad way,
Sure.
Something that's new to my sensory. So that kind of checked that box for me. So
Are there any varieties of fruit puree that you feel are underutilized or don't get the attention they deserve? That's a broad question, but is there anything that you think should be paid a little bit more attention to in the fruit world?
Absolutely. There's a grape variety that grows around here called Scuppernong and Muscadine. The Muscadine is a purple version of that, and the Scuppernong is like a white or green version of that. I don't know. Have you ever had them?
Muscadines, yeah. I mean, family heritage way back. They got them quite a bit in East Texas. They make wine out of it. But what did you say the first one? The Scufferdine?
Scuppernong.
Scuffernong, huh?
And I believe it's the state fruit of North Carolina. And it's akin to muscadine, but as far as just such a fantastic fruit to blend into some mixed culture beer, man, it's just musty and complex, and you get a ton of sugar from it. So you get a nice re-fermentation. So there's just a ton of complexity, and I love the way that it plays with beer. So, and I don't see a whole lot of breweries outside of some neighboring breweries in North Carolina that are messing with it. So
Interesting.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
So I love it when that season rolls around and the fragrance is so pungent. We have like 1,000 pounds sitting in the cooler before it goes into the beer. And you just walk into the cooler and you want to live in that smell.
Man, sounds tasty.
Yeah.
Very good. Any puree varieties not currently produced that you'd be interested in using? And I could certainly ping Chris and say, look, buddy, you got to start producing this for Gary and his team. So anything you'd like to see in puree?
Yeah, there's more and more stuff that's a few years back. We didn't have a whole lot of bulk aseptic purees that we're kind of seeing come to the market now. I love lychee fruit. Starting to see some mangosteen that's coming up. Fresh fig is one that I haven't really seen a whole lot of, and sourcing fresh figs is a bit of a challenge in the bulk realm. So that one, I'm going to stick to figs, fresh figs, not dried figs. A fresh fig puree would be, if anybody's out there listening.
I see if I can make that happen for you.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah.
So,
do you guys have prickly pear up there? I doubt it.
We do. We have prickly pear out in the Outer Banks. They grow. We did a beer festival out in the Outer Banks a couple of years back, and me and my business partner, after a night of tying one on, we're just driving around, and we're like, whoa, there's like tons of prickly pear everywhere. So we just drove around and would knock on people's doors that had these giant cactus. And we're like, hey, can we harvest your prickly pear fruit? And we did. And we brought home about 100 pounds of prickly pear.
Gosh. Was it after like a 6-pack or somewhere you go in there and you don't think you need gloves? Because those things, stubs will stay in your hands forever.
Oh, yeah.
To work with.
Yeah, we were using our pocket knives. Luckily, they were really, really ripe. So we were just kind of like stabbing them and turning.
Yeah.
They were popping right off. But yeah, not so much in the mountains. A little too cold year round for the fruit to grow. We've got a couple cactus in front of the brewery, believe it or not. And we'll get small, maybe plum size at best, prickly pear. But they grow on here. Probably not as big as in Texas, I would imagine.
No, the hill country, it's kind of the same. We get a bunch of them. My wife and I, when we could travel and we'd, roll through that area of Texas, we do the same thing. We'd stop and grab a bunch of them, make jam out of it. But what a pain in the to work with. I mean, we actually just grill them, just put them on high heat real quick and flip them around just to get those little stickies off them.
Talk about beautiful fruit, right? Stuff is
just gorgeous. And I think a lot of people just overlook that fruit altogether, but it makes some pretty good beer too.
I agree. We've made a couple different beers with prickly pear. Good stuff for sure.
Well, we talked a lot about fruit, but you've just used a whole bunch of different ingredients and unusual stuff in beer. And I hear about this infamous pizza beer. What the hell is that?
So we make a beer every year for 4th of July called Pizza Ships. We partner up with a buddy of mine, Chris Evans, who owns a local tattoo shop, Divination Tattoo, and he does the art for it. He does an alias as an artist, and his alias is Pizza Ships, and we just named the beer Pizza Ships, and coincidentally, he was working less than a block away, and he came in and he saw that the beer, he's like, that's me. So we ended up talking, and we throw this little event every year where we'll have a pizza-themed art show and pizza-themed trivia and Totino's pizza roll eating competition. And it turned into this fun event where everyone comes out, has a good time, drink the beer. Then we go to his tattoo shop and set off a bunch of fireworks. And it came about that there was this pizza place that wanted us to make a beer exclusively for them, and they would buy the whole batch, right? And we would be the featured beer at this pizza place, and they wanted me to do something weird. So, a lot of people associate what we do with kind of off the wall, different flavor combinations and unique kind of beer. So that's what they wanted from us. So I was like, so you're pre-buying the beer, so there's no reservation. So I just kind of decided that I was going to make a beer with pizza in it. And yeah, initially I was like, man, I'll approach it where I'll do tomatoes and fresh basil, and we'll make some pizza crusts and we'll throw it in the mash and like do it kind of a deconstructed method. And then whether it was me just being lazy or saying it, we ended up throwing some pizzas in, dry pizzaing, I guess. The beer came out fantastic. I honestly didn't know what to expect, but it ended up tasting pretty good. Now it's kind of more focused as being just a pretty good hazy pale ale. And we make a Chicago-style deep dish pizza at the brewery, and we'll throw like a couple in just for fun.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So
pretty cool.
Yeah.
At some point when I'm traveling in, I got to get up that way and come visit you. You guys got a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah, we got some wacky stuff for sure. That's probably one of the wackiest for sure.
Yeah. So what about herbs, botanicals, spices? I mean, you guys have done it all. Anything that stands out that you're just kind of keen to using?
I love Macroot lime leaf, which is used a lot in Thai cooking. We've used it quite a bit over the years, and it just has this distinct, unique, aroma to it. So that's probably one of my favorites. But, we've used anywhere from cinnamon to holy basil to you name it. We've probably put in a beer, Szechuan peppercorns, all kinds of weird stuff. We do a pink peppercorn and peach farmhouse beer called Natural Born Farmer. It comes out pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, really, I guess probably if I had to pick one that really speaks to me is probably that Macroot lime leaf for sure.
That's what I love about the brewing industry. Just the creativity, and there's no rules. It's so awesome. And I'm so glad you guys are doing what you're doing. Is there anything off limits to you? Anything you just absolutely hate or allergic to? Who knows?
Yeah, but I say that it's off limits to me, but I've already made a beer with it. Maybe that's why it's off limits to me. But garlic, man, doesn't belong in beer at all.
Even if it's black garlic.
And that's what I did. We were approached by a garlic festival to make the beer for the garlic festival. So I made my own black garlic, and I made like a black garlic robust porter. And, the beer just would have been better without the black garlic. So, but, it was an experiment. That's one thing that I don't, particularly care to have in beer.
Hopefully it wasn't a 105-degree day where you got people just pounding those things. I can only imagine the smell of the perspiration and the banyos, man.
Yeah. There are certain things, it's got to work. It's got to taste good. I don't care how wacky it is. You can't just do wacky just for the sake of it. At the end of the day, the beer still has to taste good. And that's for me, that's my standard. If it doesn't taste good, I'm not going to serve it. I'm not going to drink it. We'll start from scratch. But
well, you probably get a lot of options as a shift beer at the brewery, but is there something specific? What do you tend to drink at home? And it's okay if you say a Pilsner. It's okay if you say wine. I mean, you're around beer all the time, but is there something specific you like to drink?
Beer-wise, I really like mixed culture farmhouse beers. Not a ton of acidity, like a balanced acidity. Give me anything in the lager category. I love a good Schwartz beer. And I love IPAs. I really just love beer, man. I like it all. But those are probably my three as far as heavy rotation and what I have and like to drink. Those are the big three. But like bourbon is very near and dear to my heart. You'll find me at the end of the day with a Glencairn full of some sort of bourbon for sure.
We are in good company here. Awesome. Well, we've talked a lot about beer and food for that matter. Is there any specific kind of food and fruit beer pairing that you think just will really blow people away? Something that just really goes well together? I mean, you mentioned Thai food, some of the ingredients, but is there something that just stands out? You're like, this is just a bad combination.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff, man. With the direction that craft beer has gone, there's a beer for every single bite. So I could throw a fun one out there that's not really complicated that you'll probably giggle at, but a good Pabst Blue Ribbon with some General Tso's chicken is
That's not funny. You know what? Sounds awesome.
That one is one of my go-tos. So
yeah,
there's all kinds of fun flavor combinations and pairings that we do. We do them at the brewery every day. When there's not COVID happening, we've got a suggestion on the menu for every single item of food that we have. So we kind of joke that we have a constant beer dinner every day. So
my kind of place. Well, if you could do a collaboration with anyone in the world, who would it be?
Collaboration with anyone in the world. Oh man, that's a tough one. There's so many fantastic breweries out there. Does it have to be a brewery? Can it be?
No. Just curious to kind of who you look at as kind of an inspiration, if you will. Someone you think that is doing a fantastic job, whether in brewing, winery, food, whatever. Someone you'd like to work with.
Man, there's so many. And we've had such an amazing opportunity to work with so many fantastic breweries. We did a lot of collaborations. And I love the camaraderie and the education that comes out of it. One brewery that I'd love to work with that we haven't yet is Tired Hands out of Ardmore, Pennsylvania. I really like their approach. They definitely play around with a lot of different weird ingredients, and their mixed culture program is fantastic. Let's go to Buffalo Trace Distillery. I'd love to hang out there. collab with them in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, both of them sound like a good time.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can try to plan that out as well. Anything you want to plug for the brewery, Bramari, kind of what you guys are doing? I mean, I know it's difficult for people to get out and about these days during COVID, but what are you guys working on? Anything interesting that you want to share with the audience?
We do a hazy beer festival, an invitational festival every year called Above the Clouds. And we weren't able to do it. We normally do it in September, and we weren't able to do it this year. So we're thinking about maybe doing a digital version of it, where we traditionally have collaborated with a bunch of breweries and we create some version of a hazy and hoppy beer. So we're starting to talk about maybe doing a send-off like box of all the collaborations sometime in the spring. So maybe look out for that. Hopefully we can start gathering together again sooner rather than later. But that's pretty much what we've got on the horizon, and then keep pumping out beer.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep it rolling. Gary Cernak of Bramari Brewing. Hey, Gary, thanks so much for taking the time out to talk to us today. Your creativity and the flavors that you bring to brewing align with a lot of people who enjoy craft beer. Possibilities are obviously infinite and always an opportunity to try something new. So thanks for being that inspiration, and appreciate you coming on. And for you listeners out there, thanks for hanging with us. And as always, keep your eyes and ears peeled for the next episode of the Brew Deck Podcast. Till next time, I'm your host, Toby Tucker.
Yeah, thanks, Toby.